Imagine for a second that you're a short story writer or a novelist. How do you develop a character? What does the character in your story think? What does he or she look like? What motivates your character to do X, Y, or Z? Let's say that you are a mystery writer. You write crime fiction. What makes the murderer in your story into a murderer? What makes the detective find out who the murderer is? So if you are a writer, you are bound to be interested in psychology. It is impossible for a writer to be unaware of modern psychology and its research. And it is for this reason that most writers preoccupy themselves with psychology and the research findings in psychology. A big example of that was Fyodor Dostoevsky, famous Russian writer. His novel, The Brothers Karamazov, is a classic. In this story, he actually talks about three brothers, one of whom ends up killing his own father. Dostoevsky was inspired by Sigmund Freud, the founder of modern psychology. Sigmund Freud had proposed that most boys have a love-hate relationship with their father. The love is at the conscious level, but the hate is mostly at the unconscious level. Freud proposed that boys seek to replace their fathers. And he would argue that it is for this reason that you would find a little boy of 6 or 7 years old trying to literally walk in his father's shoes. It is a very cute sight for most of us when the little boy puts his tiny little feet into his father's big shoes and tries to walk in them. But Sigmund Freud argues that there is an unconscious need to replace the father. Dostoevsky, who was a big fan of Sigmund Freud and of his psychology, created a character where the person ended up killing his own father. But this relationship wasn't one-sided. Freud was an admirer of Dostoevsky and in fact had read most of his works. Now, the thing is that when I, as a psychologist, read literature, I am fascinated by the insights of the writers about people, especially good writers. When I consider somebody a bad writer, it is usually not because of their poor writing style. It is usually because of their lack of command of human psychology. It is usually because of their lack of understanding of human psychology. What we find is that a good writer knows how to develop their characters as if they were real life, thinking, feeling, walking, talking beings. A good story writer keeps in mind the impact of trauma. A good story writer keeps in mind the impact of positive events. A good story writer keeps in mind the nature of human relationships. If they didn't, they wouldn't be able to develop their story into something meaningful. So, when we're talking about writing fiction, especially writing where the characters develop over time. So, a short story may be just a small event, but a novel requires sometimes talking about the person from early childhood, watching them grow into adolescence, then into adulthood, and sometimes into old age, death, and the new generation is sometimes treated. If you are a habitual reader of novels, you will notice that a novelist works very, very hard in developing not just the physical features of their characters, but also their psychological traits and their psychological development. And a lot of the times, when the character does something that is unpredictable, then the novel is usually worth reading. When the character does something unpredictable, it is only then that we enjoy the novel and it is not something that we consider trite or cliched. But literature is not just prose. There is this whole area that we call poetry. There are poets who are considered great poets, some are considered mediocre poets, and there are many others were considered bad poets. What are the traits of a good poet? A good poet usually deals with words and images in such a way that they create emotion in the reader. And this emotion is usually so powerful that people can't resist responding to good poetry. A lot of people cry when they hear sad poetry. A lot of people get depressed when they hear sad poetry. A lot of people feel very, very energetic and motivated when they hear inspiring poetry or when they read inspirational poetry. If you look at the poetry of Allama Iqbal in Urdu, it is very, very inspirational. It invites and incites people to action. If you read poetry by Ghalib, people tend to think of strange ideas, very clever ideas, but it's a play on words so that you appreciate the poet's intelligence. If you read poetry by Nasir Kazmi or Mir Taqi Mir, you find that they create images in your head, images that you cannot resist. A great poet displays mastery not only over words but also over capturing human emotion.